A very pleasant Sabbath and season's greetings to all of our viewers. We are delighted to be with you today for another edition of Let's Talk. Today is special because it is the Sabbath, of course. It is also Christmas. Christmas celebrated by the world on December 25. And today is a Sabbath, so we want to take the opportunity to wish all of our viewers a very meaningful time as you focus on the memory of the birth of Jesus Christ. I trust that you focus on much more than the memory of the birth of Jesus Christ, and that you have established a relationship with him. Well, on Let's Talk today, we are going to be talking about something that is very important. Whether you believe in the celebration of Christmas or not, whether you are a Christian or not, chances are you look forward to the holiday and your children look forward to the extra snacks and treats that, associated with Christmas time. Christmas cakes, ice creams, marshmallows, and the variety of juices and drinks are all packed with a certain substance we will talk to in a little bit. Before we go into our subject, we want to invite you to have a word of prayer with us. Almighty Father and our God, we pray that you will be with us as we go into today's program. We thank you for the opportunity to share with our friends and ask that you will be with us as we minister on your behalf today, as we discuss this very important subject. Grant your peace and your grace. Be with our special guests. Take full control and have your own way. In Jesus' name, amen. So friends, yes, we are saying that at this time, whether or not you believe in the celebration of Christmas, you look forward to the holiday. And one thing that is associated with holiday celebrations is foods and drinks. And of course, at Christmas time, there are Christmas cakes, there are ice creams, there are sweets, there are all kinds of things. And all of these things are packed with sugar. Today on Let's Talk, we will examine the effect of sugar on your child, and now on you too, but we're focusing primarily on your child. With us to discuss this very important subject is a pediatrician, a well-known face and voice in the Antiguan community. We have Dr. Siobhan Bell Jarvis. Dr. Jarvis is an advocate for change, a champion for quality improvement. She's a consultant pediatrician and head of the pediatric department at the Sir Leicester Bird Medical Center. Dr. Bell Jarvis is passionate about patient education and empowerment, and as such is the newly appointed chairperson for the Maternal, Child and Adolescent Health Committee in Antigua and Barbuda. I shall have to ask her about this. A member of the National Technical Working Group, an advisory body for the Twin Island state on COVID-19 vaccines, and is the Health and Temperance Director within her local congregation. In 2020, she was celebrated as a health worker hero by the University Research Council for her work with families potentially affected by the Zika virus. Some of us remember that. Having a bachelor's degree in basic medical sciences with honors, Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery, Doctor of Medicine degree in pediatrics, and her current pursuit of a master's in neonatology. Did I say that correctly? All of these very significant, important accomplishments, Dr. Jarvis would have us know, pale in comparison to her having accepted Jesus as her personal savior. As a servant of God, a friend to man, sounds like a pathfinder, a mother of three, and wife of one man, her ultimate aim is to be saved in heaven at last. We want to welcome Dr. Jarvis on this important discussion, this subject that we're talking about We're talking about your children and sugar. Dr. Bell Jarvis, it is indeed a pleasure to have you on Let's Talk today. We're delighted, and we just want to say welcome, and please say a word of greetings to those who are viewing or listening on Second Advent.
Good afternoon, Dr. Greene. Good afternoon to your viewing and listening audience. Season's greetings to all, and I'm hoping that this forum will be one that is informative and one that would lead to lifestyle changes.
Wonderful. We have a very important subject to discuss this afternoon, but there are a couple of questions I want to ask you before we go into the subject. The first one, I observe that you have been appointed to chair a maternal, child, and adolescent health committee. I thought I was very conversant with the news and those kinds of things, but that's a new one to me. So what's that all about?
Okay, great. So we recognize that, taking care of both mother and child are so crucial that we need a committee in place that is able to basically put important plans in place, ensure that we advocate, ensure that legally we are covered where healthcare for that vulnerable group is concerned. And so once we make appropriate choices for the specialized group, ultimately healthy children will lead to healthy adults and ultimately should help the economy to thrive. And so we focus on our mothers, on children, so basically from birth to 19 and then onwards actually, but adolescents 10 to 19 years old as well. It's a very important committee. It was actually a bit dormant, but basically resurfaced in the year 2018. And basically, we've been going full force ever since.
Okay, interesting. My next question to you, before we get into our subject, is who is a pediatrician, and why can't we just have a regular doctor attend to whatever a pediatrician does?
Okay, so pediatrician is someone, or physician rather, who has specialized in the care of children, to include our newborns, infants, toddlers, primary schoolers, and adolescents. So basically, we care for children from birth to the age of 15 years, 364 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes here in Antigua and Barbuda. So basically, birth to 16 years old. You'll find in the US and in other jurisdictions, they actually take care of children up to the age of 21. Now, children are not just small adults. It's a very key or opportune time for change. And so after having a general degree as a physician, you have to do 4 additional years of study to become a pediatrician. And believe it or not, we do not only deal with ill children, but we deal with children who are well. We want to basically give the parents what we call anticipatory guidance, so they know what it is that they need to do. We also want to ensure that our children are growing and developing normally and cover the childhood immunizations. And of late, our adolescent group is a specialized group that we cater to, recognizing that there are significant changes in development to include mental development. So we also embrace our adolescents as well. And believe it or not, children are not just small adults. We also do antenatal counseling. So we try to let parents know what to expect as they come together to have a child. And so it goes beyond just birth, actually. We go from conception upwards, working along with our obstetricians. I noticed you had an obstetrician last week. So we work hand in hand with the obstetrician from conception all the way up to being an adolescent.
I was going to say, I'm booking you for another program. This matter of those 14, 15-year-olds. Now, I'm sure that they don't like the idea of being called children, but that's what it is. Well, we will talk about that some more, but let's go, because we have quite a bit that we want to cover today. You did mention that I did have an obstetrician just a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, in fact, and she indicated that the nutrition of pregnant women is very important to both mother and baby. We are now focusing on the baby and the child, well, children. You have just established the perimeters there. When we say children, who we're referring to in terms of our discussion for this afternoon. What role does nutrition play in the developmental process of children?
Okay, so when we look at nutrition, we have to look at not only what is taken in, but also the critical time frame in which exposure takes place. So nutrition really speaks to the provision of nutrients from the environment, whether it be in the form of food or even water, to facilitate growth. And one of the key areas of the body that is highly dependent on nutrition is the brain. And so we recognize that nutrition will help us to basically express our genes and will help us to basically optimize who we are intended to be. Now, I want to make sure that everybody who is listening past the Greene is able to follow. And so when we use the word genes, we basically speak to the building blocks that are responsible for making us look the way we do, the color of our eyes, the texture of our hair, basically allowing children to look like their parents. And so we recognize the brain, for example, being a specialized and complex organ, is dependent on things like folic acid, iron, zinc, special fats, right? So these are important in terms of development, but it's not only the type of foods that we're exposed to, but also the critical time periods. And so when persons are ready to have children, Dr. Greene, one of the unfortunate circumstances is that we wait until we already know that we're pregnant to start changing our nutrition and changing our lifestyle. Folic acid, for example, is very important in brain development and growth. So ideally, once planning to have a baby, you should start folic acid at least 3 months prior to conception. That means the pregnancy should be planned at least 3 months prior. So that just speaks to one of the key nutrients that is needed. And the brain is something that is very plastic. So I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the concept of the 1,000 days, the first 1,000 days. This is a crucial time period from conception to a child's second birthday, where nutrition is going to determine the outcome in terms of intelligence, etc., of a child. And I hope we're all following.
Well, you're saying some very interesting things there, and I'm of course, when I was conceived, I had no knowledge, but based on my early life experiences, I'm saying I started out with some very negatives because, you know, my mother struggled so much with the whole matter of taking care of her 9 children, me being number 9, and understanding the challenges of early years. This is very important, and I wish you could just say that again. Now, you mentioned that one should start to prepare even before pregnancy. The trouble is that a lot of people get pregnant without even desiring to be. So that's a challenge there.
That's correct. So prenatal counseling, which is different to antenatal counseling, is very important. And this is a discussion that is going to be had with our obstetrician, who we had last week. We're going to make sure as a female, and even as a male too, that you are at your ideal weight for your height, that your chronic illnesses, to include diabetes, hypertension, etc., are under control, that if you are on any medication, that it is reviewed so that you can be on the best medication that would have the least likely negative impact on the developing brain and developing child, and that you commence your folic acid for optimal brain growth and development at least 3 months prior to conception. So again, as we said, we hold hands with the obstetricians, and we're working from preconception days, conception, up to the first 1,000 days, very crucial for brain development. And then we'll speak about another period, which is basically after the 1,000 days have been completed, up to your 5th birthday and up to your 7th birthday. We do know if you have a child up to 7 years, once you train them well, you really should not have any significant changes going forward.
Very interesting indeed. Now, let me throw this in as well, because the very early years. Now, you mentioned 1,000 days. That sounds like 3 years, just about. You know.
Right, but remember, we're going from conception. So from conception to your 2nd birthday. That's the 1,000 days.
From conception. Okay.
From conception, because by the time you know you're pregnant, you've already started to have formation of the brain and spinal cord. So having intervention at that point in time is really too late, especially when it comes to key nutrients, as I said, folic acid, especially, but also to include your iron, your zinc, and special fats.
I was just thinking that, you know, a lot of this period is really the mother's nutrition, because but for the first 9 months for sure, and then at that period, I don't know exactly that everybody follows the counsel, but a major portion of the remaining period there is breastfeeding time. So this is significant for the parent.
This is significant. Additionally, Pastor Greene, what I must say, and I'm probably going to blow many of our minds away because it blew my mind away as well, is that based on the taste buds, or the taste preference rather, of the mother, it does tailor the amniotic fluid, right, as well as the taste that the newborn will develop and thrive on as the baby grows. So this whole concept of, okay, I'm eating for two and eating a lot of junk can be very dangerous, because again, whatever is consumed is going to flavor, so to speak, the amniotic fluid, and it's also going to dictate the taste preference of the newborn and growing child. Very important here, not to be underestimated. And the same thing happens with breastfeeding as well, but we'll get there.
I suppose that today being a day when, and tomorrow too, I was going to say, for those persons who have already had their lunch, maybe they're breathing a sigh of relief. But then tomorrow, I imagine that lots of families are going to be having get-togethers, and there are those young couples who do not yet have children. I think they need to listen up to what we have in store. But that's an interesting concept, that your diet is going to influence the taste, you're saying, of the baby. Wow, that's interesting. Wow. Well, let's go a little deeper, because I've been hearing that many of the children in the Caribbean are demonstrating signs of overweight or even diabetes. How alarming is this, and what are the contributing factors?
Okay, so it's very alarming in the Caribbean region. The Caribbean Public Health Agency in 2021 actually revealed that the rates of obesity in the Caribbean are actually 2 to 3 times higher than that of the rest of the world. And that is very unfortunate. So the rates of obesity in the United States of America, for example, are basically 1 in 6 children. Whereas when we look at the rates of being overweight or obese in the Caribbean, the latest statistic in 2018 said that we're basically 1 in 3. So if you had 3 children in front of you, at least one of them would be overweight or obese. When we look at the rates of diabetes in 2013, looking at North America and the Caribbean, for type 1 diabetes alone, we had 108,600 children with type 1 diabetes, with 16 new children per 100,000 being diagnosed a year. So let's go over this again and make it very simple. In the Caribbean region, we are 2 to 3 times higher in terms of our rates when we look at obesity. And this is as of 2021. When we look at the rates of being overweight or obese in the United States of America, you're basically looking at 1 out of 6 children. When we're looking at the rates here in the Caribbean region, we're actually 1 in 3. And some more recent data may say, okay, we may be 1 in 3 to 1 in 4. And this is very alarming, and this is backdated data. So if we were to look at the data from the pandemic going forward, because remember, our children would mostly have been home, having had interrupted periods in terms of physical activity, then we can definitely say that the rates of being overweight and obese have definitely skyrocketed. I'm not sure about other parents, but for me, my children, the clothes can't fit them. You know what I mean? They're growing, yes, but the rates at which they're growing and the weight compared to their height is definitely increasing, and it has to do with several factors, which we'll discuss.
Well, you know, what I'm thinking about here, Dr. Jarvis, is that this is almost unexpected. I would have felt that, given that we hear so many complaints, unless people are not really speaking truthfully, but given that we hear so much complaints about poverty, about people struggling economically in the Caribbean, you would have felt that it would have been the opposite, that the children who are struggling, whose parents are in quote unquote the developing world, would be in a better position in terms of diabetes, in terms of overweight, in terms of obesity, than those who are in the developed world, because they simply are exposed to more. But what we're seeing here, based on the statistics that you're showing, is that this is the opposite. So for anybody who may be listening, who may not quite understand the terminologies you're using in terms of overweight and obesity, can you just in a minute, just clarify?
Sure. So basically, we look at our children in terms of their growth based on their weight and based on their height. And basically, there are basically a range of weights that are appropriate for an individual's height, and we use growth charts. So to make it very simple, once you are, for adults, you use set numbers. For children, it's a bit different. We look at the average child of a certain age and said, okay, this is the appropriate weight for your height. Once you're ranging above what we call the 85th percentile, so your weight for your height is more than what 85% of children that age would be, then you're considered to be overweight. If you're more than 95% weight for height compared to other children, then you would be what we call obese. So you have being overweight versus being obese, and both states can be very dangerous in terms of all the organs in our body, and we'll get to the complications a little later on.
So my initial question was regarding not just the trend, but what may be contributing to.
Okay, great. So when we look at the contributing factors, there's several things. We eat a lot in terms of high calorie foods and low nutrient foods. So Dr. Greene, what you'd notice is that even though we are in developing countries, remember we're having a lot of processed foods, and we're having a lot of foods that are low in terms of our nutrient content. We're also taking a lot of processed foods because these tend to be cheaper. So when you look at the socioeconomic status or what persons can afford, instead of buying fruits and vegetables, instead of that, we're buying a lot of processed foods. Then when we look at other things to include our lifestyles, a lot of us have what we call sedentary lifestyles. We're not as active. So instead of walking from your home to the supermarket, if there's one nearby, we opt to jump in the car and go down the road. You recognize as well that especially in our Caribbean regions, you have older children taking care of younger children. The older child is likely to utilize something that is quick to produce, something that is processed in a tin, basically opening it and serving it, if you know what I mean. So we've moved away from the backyard garden, so to speak, and we've now moved into an ultra processed era. So high calorie foods, low nutrient foods, our sugar sweetened beverages, right? And remember, a lot of the food chains are going to give you deals. I'm not going to call any franchises here this afternoon, but you have deals for burgers, chicken, fries, juice. You know what I mean? You can get the combo. And I mean, it's cheaper than probably getting a smoothie made from fruits or even vegetables, etc. And then we have to look at the genetic component. In Antigua and Barbuda, and I'm sure across the other countries within SLC, we say, oh, daddy, big boned. So the child will be big boned. But I'm here to tell you today that genetics only contributes to 5% as it relates to causation of being overweight or obese. 5%. The rest is related to our behavior in terms of our dietary choices, as well as to our sedentary lifestyles.
Now, I have a bunch of questions to ask you out of that, but observation first, because I drove to let me not be specific. Anytime you go to the supermarket, and let's take a major supermarket here, let's say Epicurean, and you check the parking lots, most of the vehicles are parked closest to the supermarkets. Mm-hmm. And people drive around 3 and 4 times until they can get a spot as close as possible so they don't have to walk. Perhaps it's a good idea to try to park as far away from the door so that you could give yourself some time, an opportunity to take a few extra steps. Now you said that 5%. That's almost negligible.
It's due to genetics.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, here's my question out of this, what you just said there. Because I think I also heard that when a person develops fat tissues, so if I am overweight and I go on a program and I shed some weight, that it's relatively easy for me to regain the weight because the structure is already in place. Is that correct?
Okay, so the different things that can predispose or put somebody at risk of rapidly regaining weight, especially if they are not taking the appropriate steps. Many times what we tend to do as persons in the Caribbean is to try to go on a special diet or basically any type of fast, but we're not taking the holistic view, right? So we go through this period of fasting, and then we are not looking at the aspect of exercise, etc., right? So yes, you do have persons who have the genetic potential where, okay, even though I try to lose weight, I may not lose weight. You have women who have what is called, for example, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which puts you at more risk of being overweight, obese, and having even diabetes. But for other persons, yes, you can diet and lose weight, but if you do not have a sustained lifestyle, the weight will come right back, okay? And of course, the more that you've been exposed to a consistent lifestyle of processed food and sugar-sweetened beverages, as we're going to go through in terms of the changes of the brain or within the brain, it's very difficult for you to change that lifestyle.
Interesting. There is so much, but we do have to move on here. Now, I want to zero in on the matter. I really would like to say, or for you to say a little bit more about this the sedentary lifestyle, the lack of exercise, the need to walk more, I suppose. And you did make reference to the fact that COVID has probably made things a little more difficult because people are not going to school, they're not running around with their friends, they're not up and about, and so people are at home. I used to say to my children when I was a child, I was outside climbing trees and running around the place. We used to walk to school, and so the whole structure has changed, which means that parents have to take the extra effort to make sure that the children get in those activities that are so important for their development.
Yes. So when we look at the sedentary lifestyle, and I'm going to narrow it down to our kids now, our children spend a lot of time in front of the screen, okay? So they utilize the screen for their fun time. Now, because of COVID, they utilize the screen for their school time. And in the ideal sense, children really should have, and dependent on age, approximately 2 hours of screen time per day. Now, because of COVID, as we would have said, and even outside of that, you find that our children are no longer as actively involved in sports, right? In our physical education in schools, although it should be happening in all schools for all grades, right? And then you have more screen time. And with screen time, you also have snacking, which is very dangerous because as you focus on the screen, you're basically not focusing on how much you're taking in. So one of the things that we as pediatricians discourage is eating in front of the screen because you lose your inhibition and you don't realize when you're full. So you consistently eat, right? So less physical activity. Our children should be exercising for at least 60 minutes for at least 5 days per week. Now, how many of our parents can actually raise their hands to say, yes, my child does this amount of physical activity? The other thing you recognize is that children follow what their parents do. How many of our parents can raise their hands to say, yes, I exercise for at least 30 minutes for at least 5 to 7 days per week? I'm sure the hands may be a bit negligible. Likewise, we as parents, we try to tell our patient, eat healthy, our children, eat healthy, eat your fruits, eat your vegetables. But when you look in the parents' plate, there are no fruits or vegetables. And so the behavior of the parents trickle down to the behavior and lifestyle of our children. Our parents are eating from franchises and giving our children the franchises as snacks. Therefore, we can expect nothing else but our children being overweight or obese. So I put it to you, Dr. Greene, that whereas we say, oh, daddy is big boned, so the child is big boned. It's not that. It's the behavior and the food choices of the parents that then leads to similar food choices for our children, and it's a vicious cycle.
Let's talk about sugar, because as I said in my introduction earlier on, you know, so many of the foods around us, especially at the Christmas time, are packed with sugar. So let's talk about sugar a little bit. Most persons love the taste of sugar. It seems so satisfying and gratifying. Well, Doc, what exactly is sugar, and is there a difference between natural and artificial sugars?
Okay, so sugars are basically sweetened carbohydrates, the sweet tasting carbohydrates, so to speak. We have come to accept them as the sort of crystalline or crystal shaped soluble substance. Many of us are familiar with white or brown sugar, but it's actually basically sweetened or the sweet carbohydrates. And there are actually 6 different types of sugars. You have your glucose, your fructose, galactose, lactose, maltose, sucrose. Terms that you may have been exposed to, but just simply put, you have different types of sugars based on how they're made. So naturally occurring sugars are those things that occur naturally in our foods, whereas artificial sugars are those that are chemically modified, right? You can even say a laboratory, for example. So when we look at things like our sucrose, it's naturally occurring in many of our fruits and even our root vegetables, but it's very common in processed foods. If you look on the label, you're going to see something that says high fructose corn syrup, right? And it's very common in our sodas and sweetened beverages. Glucose, very simple, building block of carbohydrate. Fructose, that's fruit sugar. Most of us are familiar with fructose. It's present in our fruits, in honey, in our root vegetables, right? And then you have, basically those are the main types. So fructose, you can find it in your sugarcane, your beets, and your corn. But what is happening with most of us is that we're taking in the artificial sugars instead of the naturally occurring sugars. I want to put it to you, Dr. Greene, that children, by definition, for the American Heart Association, once you're between the ages of 2 to 18, you're only allowed 6 teaspoons of sugar per day. That seems like a lot for many persons, 6 teaspoons. But when you look at it, unfortunately, children who are 1 to 3 are already taking 12 teaspoons of sugar per day. And those who are 4 to 8 are actually taking 21 teaspoons. Now you're thinking in your mind, nah, I'm not taking that much sugar. Let's look at some of the common beverages that we take, right? So when you look at something like Sprite, for example, and this is commonly available information, so there's no harm in calling the specific brand. A can of Sprite actually has 7 teaspoons of sugar, right? You can think of how easy it is to drink a can of Sprite in the morning and a can in the evening, or even 2 at a special dinner, all right? Some of the other specialized drinks that we take in contain 8 teaspoons of sugar, right? So remember, you're having your breakfast, you're adding 2 to 3 teaspoons of sugar to your porridge or to your tea, right? Then you might have bread and something else as a snack, you're getting sugar there. Then you eat your supper and you also have dessert with it. Your cake and your ice cream, you're getting sugar there. Plus you're taking in juice. So you're having artificial sugars, increased calories, and therefore you're going to have weight gain and ultimate obesity and other negative impacts in terms of our body.
So Dr. Jarvis, you're saying, because I really want this point to be made clear, it may be okay for me to eat a piece of sugar cane. I get naturally occurring sugars there, but then to make, and I'm going to say sorrel. I stopped drinking sorrel a while now because I was making some sorrel one time. And when I realized how much sugar it was taken to make that thing drinkable, I said, no, this cannot be good for me. So the amount of artificial sugars that I'm packing in it is the challenge.
Excellent point, because you can imagine you have a pot of juice that you're making And you're not taking a teaspoon, Pastor Greene. You're taking a pot spoon.
Yes.
And dipping it into the sugar and putting it in. And remember, we're saying that for our children, 2 to 18, you're only allowed 6 teaspoons of sugar per day. Remember now, think back to our infants. And by infants, we mean those who are less than 1 year. And we can even go to those who are less than 6 months. Ideally, for the first 6 months, it should be breast milk only. We have parents who are introducing juice, what you call pop or porridge, and we're adding sugars even from those early ages. And we're going to speak about the impact of sugar on the body, but that is definitely detrimental. The other thing I must mention before we move on is the use of juice. Parents have been utilizing juice even before the age of 12 months. The American Academy of Pediatrics in about 2017 or so made a change to their policy because they recognized the detrimental impact of sugar. So previously they had said once you're 6 months and older, you can take juice. But now the statement is, or the recommendation is, that juice should not be started before the age of 12 months. Parents, I hope you're listening. And even when juice is introduced, there is a set amount that you're allowed, and I'll do this very quickly, Pastor Greene, because it's very important. 1 to 3 years, you're allowed only 4 ounces of juice per day. Now we're going to do some quick math. An ounce is 30 mils, 30, right? So 4 ounces means 4 by 30, that's 120 mils of juice. When you think of the Capri Sun, a common juice that we give to our kids, it has 6 ounces of juice. So a Capri Sun is too much juice for a 1 to 3 year old. And if you open the lunch kit of many of our toddlers, you're going to find a Capri Sun in there. 4 to 6 years old, you're allowed 4 to 6 ounces of juice. 7 and older, 8 ounces of juice. So a Capri Sun is just about enough for a 4 to 6 year old, but definitely it's too much juice for 1 to 3. Okay, so I just want to plug that in there. No juice before the age of 12 months, and children 2 to 18 years, only 6 teaspoons of sugar.
So bottom line is we have some real terrible habits when it comes to what we take into our bodies, and especially when we, as a pediatrician, do you sometimes go to a school and search the children's lunch kits to see what's there?
Well, Pastor Greene, I don't have to search the lunch kits, because when I drive along the road, you have many vendors who are selling fried chicken and who are basically displaying several sugar sweetened beverages for sale. Okay, and it's a problem. That is why coming up in 2022, we are likely going to introduce the taxes on sugar sweetened beverages. So it will be cheaper for you to have healthier options and more expensive for you to buy your sodas, etc. Likewise, in our schools, we're straying in terms of content, but things like popcorn and so on, no. So the schools policy making, and that's one of the areas where the Maternal, Child and Adolescent Health Committee comes in. We need to have policies in place that are legally binding to govern what schools can serve, what children can eat while they're on the school compound, and what vendors are able to provide for our children. So ideally, no juice, water only, right? And fruit only.
Now, all right, okay, you're here. I thought I lost you, but that's fine. I noticed that when you mention the recommendations in terms of the juice, the amount of juice that we can take into our bodies, you seem to put juice and drink in the same category. And I see a lot of these, sometimes I look at the labels and I see something that says 5% juice, 6% juice. Does that make a difference?
Okay, so ideally when you're looking for something to drink in terms of options for your child, really you can look for something that says 100% pure fruit juice, right? And look for labels that say no sugar added, but still you have to read the label, because if you're seeing high fructose corn starch, right, or high fructose corn syrup, then it speaks to the fact that you do have artificial flavors or artificial sugars within the juice, right? So 100% pure fruit juice, that's fine. But then what you have is that a lot of these labels, the front of the box is nice and pretty, saying fruit juice, but it's not 100% fruit juice. And when you check the label, you have quite a bit of sugar within. So it's all about the sugar content and all about looking for what we call artificial sugars, especially your high fructose corn syrup. That is very significant in terms of putting you at risk.
Well, let's talk about what this sugar does in the body. We have said a lot about the fact that we're taking so much in, but what does it really do in our bodies?
Okay, so I'm going to be very general. I'm not going to go into the science of it. I'm going to speak to the ultimate disease processes that can occur because of increased sugar intake. So increase in terms of heart disease, okay? That definitely can occur because of increased sugar. Increased rates of diabetes. Remember, diabetes, you have two types, types 1 and type 2. Type 1 is basically where insulin, that special thing within the body that helps to break down your sugars, you're not having any of that being produced. Whereas type 2, or very little, type 2 is basically where you're not having enough insulin to deal with the high glucose or sugar load, right? So we're seeing a lot more of type 2 diabetes. Increased sugar can lead to weight gain. It can lead to you having what we call a fatty liver, so a lot of fat within the liver itself. It is very addictive, and I know we're going to speak about that because it actually leads to release of dopamine within the brain. So this is your feel-good hormone. This is a hormone that is also produced when we utilize substances or drugs, your cocaine, etc. So just like you can get your high or your addictive nature to substances like your cocaine, your sugar does the same thing. And so therefore, to get that same feeling of content, oh yes, the chocolate cake is good, you have to eat a lot more to basically get the same feeling. And so it leads to you being overeating, so to speak. And then sugar can increase the amount of inflammation within the body. So ultimately, we've found that persons can have increased rate of diseases of the joint. It also impacts your mental health or your mood. So the increased rates of depression and mood disorders in the long term. It produces special products that have a negative impact on the collagen of your skin. So the skin sags a bit more and the skin is actually a bit more wrinkled. So you do find that persons who imbibe or take in a lot of sugars and processed foods definitely put on a lot of weight, and they tend to and can look a lot older. And ultimately, due to the addiction, you can have overeating. So I've said a lot, Dr. Greene, and we haven't even gone into all the complications of being obese yet. So heart disease, diabetes, having a lot of fat on your liver, becoming addicted, leading to you overeating, inflammation within the body to include within the joints, mood disorders, depression, and of course your skin being a bit more saggy or wrinkled, and so you look a little bit on the older side, Dr. Greene. So if you want to look young, you need to definitely move away from the sugars, the sugar-sweetened beverages, and the processed foods, and increase your physical activity and your naturally occurring sugars.
Some folks are angry with me for having this program today.
We're spoiling the season.
Wow. Now, I mean, you mentioned so much there, so much for us to give attention to. But I want to take up on the matter of the addiction, because recently I listened to a documentary on sugar, and the presenters suggest that many of the foods that call for sugar as an ingredient are really can't do without it. And I remember them mentioning bread as an example, apart from the bit of sugar that you may need to allow for the activation of the yeast. They were showing that many of the breads that we eat have much sugar, and it is their opinion that the reason for the addition of sugars in some of these foods is for no other reason than to provide an addictive quality so that people will have a craving for it next time. Let's take your take on this one.
I agree. And, you know, it can be a very smart, over the edge marketing tool, because once you recognize that, hey, I'm craving this thing, then I'm going to buy more and more of it. And as I would have said, it's a generational change. So if the parent is taking this substance, there's increased dopamine, addiction, craving, overindulgence in a particular substance. Remember, the children within the household are going to basically gravitate towards something similar, because who parents are, children become. And so ultimately, you do find that certain brands are almost household brands, where I pick up this particular brand of ice cream, I pick up this particular brand of candy, because the added sugar now has me addicted and I crave this particular substance. So it's a very smart marketing tool that has basically grabbed the attention and has actually altered the mindset of many of our homes, unfortunately, across South Leeward Conference.
Unfortunate indeed. You know, interesting. Well, it's Christmas. Traditionally, we have a lot of goodies, plenty of sugary foods. Children love this kind of thing. Now, can you take us through how we should balance the tradition with our concern for good health and taste? Because, you know, a lot of people say, well, yeah, you know, the challenge in eating healthy is that the food has no taste. Talk to us about this.
Okay, so again, it's going to make it a little difficult, because again, our culture sort of dictates the practices within the season. And as well, because our tastes have already been curbed into, you know, enjoying these particular substances, it does make it a bit more difficult. And so I encourage us to think about the implications of sugar on our bodies and try to utilize alternatives, right? So we're going to use the naturally occurring sugars. So we're going to try smoothies. We're going to try our fruit salads, right? We're going to try to minimize juice. And for those who are giving our children juice during the season, you can actually try 1 part juice to 10 parts water. They're going to initially not like it, but it will grow on them, because believe it or not, children cannot access what adults do not provide. I'll say that again, Dr. Greene. Children cannot access what parents do not provide. So if you are not providing it for your children, it's not within your household, it's less likely for you to access it. So the decision has to be one that is family-based. The other thing I must emphasize, which is often overlooked, is the fact that we need to ensure that we eat breakfast. That will help us to minimize the snacking throughout the day, even throughout the season. Once we have a good breakfast, then the likelihood of us snacking will decrease, and therefore the intake of artificial sugars should also decrease. And lastly, I would say, Dr. Greene, try to, instead of utilizing the juices that require a lot of sugars for them to taste good, try to utilize the naturally occurring sugars within the fruits that we naturally have, and that should make a difference. So again, remember the negative impact. Remember that you want to look young and not have wrinkled skin, right? Remember that you want your brain to function well. You don't want to become addicted. So try to think of the health impact, then try to have better choices using fruits and becoming creative with what you do with them, and ensuring that you have less snacks throughout the day by eating a good breakfast. And again, making the change as a family so that what is available is that which is healthy, should help you throughout the Christmas season and beyond.
Now, for somebody like me, I mean, in terms of size, we may be tempted to say that, well, I'm not overweight, so I can overindulge. Is there a danger in that?
There is a danger, because again, you're not only looking at your absolute weight, we're also looking at the amount of fat that accumulates around the midsection or tummy area. So what you're noticing more of, Pastor Greene, is you have a lot of persons that are your structure, but they're unable to see their toes when you look down. I'm not going to challenge you, Pastor Greene, to look down and see if you can see your toes by standing straight. So we're having a lot of persons who have a slim build, but are now having increase in terms of what we call the abdominal circumference, so the size of the tummies, and the waist circumference as well. So if you're able to squeeze and you're having a bulge, you're already having a problem. So it's not just about having excess weight, but look at the size of your tummy, look at the size of your waist, and you'll see that if you're overindulging, it's also a problem. And again, we speak to holistic change, not only our input or our nutrition, but also having physical activity to go along with that. Because the person who has increase in terms of the waist circumference can also have a fatty liver and maybe more unhealthy than a person who seems to be more heavy set, but is of an appropriate weight for their height.
I suspect that in my own experience, it appears to me as though we can train our taste buds. If I drink something that has a high concentration of sugars, I immediately pick it up. And I suppose when the point I'm making here is that your body can get accustomed and will eventually, that thing which once upon a time seemed so inviting would seem not so inviting anymore.
Right, so I wanted to actually go to that next in terms of taste. Is it something, as you would have mentioned, is it innate? Is it something that we're born with, or something that is acquired over time? So when we look at us, when we are basically born, and as we grow and develop, we basically have innate taste, right? So that of something being sweet, something being salty, something being sour, something being bitter, something being savory. And, you know, some persons most often shy away from things that are bitter because the body in and of itself associates something that is bitter with what we call toxicity. And some plants naturally are more bitter in terms of being able to preserve self so that they're not eaten, for example. It's a protective mechanism for some of the plants. And so we're born with those innate tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, right? And savory. But as I would have said, ultimately you can have what is called an acquired taste based on your experience and based on your exposure. So especially for our children, I would have spoken to the fact that your acquired taste even begins from within the womb based on what your mother takes in, right? That flavors what you go to prefer. Likewise, while a mother is breastfeeding, that which she eats also affects the acquired taste of her newborn as the baby grows. And then for us as parents, as we offer our children food, what we offer to them ultimately builds their preference of what they want to intake. So if we're offering them a lot of sugar from very early up, remember we're speaking about the whole issue of changes within the brain. The brain is like a tree, and you're going to see what is the process of what we call pruning, so to speak, and blooming. That is based on your experiences in life. So as you're exposed to that which is sugary, that which is salty, you're blooming and pruning the neurons or even the special parts within your brain. And you're also affecting the taste buds. And so ultimately your preference is that of which is sugary, and it's a problem.
Very interesting. I did notice with my own children that because we made a decision not to expose them to sugar in their very early years, that later on in life, they just had no desire for sweets and
Exactly. And guess what? It's not too late, because even though your taste buds have been nurtured into that element of sweet and salt, gradually, and we don't expect a sudden boof, we're going to just cut out sugar one time. It has to be a gradual process, right? Because remember, you can have withdrawals. Remember, you're addicted to this now. So you have to gradually pull back. And believe it or not, over time, your acquired taste will change based on what you are exposed to. And that is the power of the human brain. That is the power of God, and basically the power of our taste buds over time. So once you train your taste buds, your acquired taste will differ or veer towards that which you now choose.
Well, we perhaps have time for one other thing, and I want to ask you this, Dr. Jarvis. I've heard about some combinations that can have very serious negative consequences on our children. I'm aware that everything you hear these days is not necessarily the truth. And depending on where you get your information, you can be as off as the East is from the West. But is it true that sugar and milk combine in the stomach to produce alcohol? If this is so, how does it affect the child?
Okay, so let's go to, I'm going to answer this in a very unique way and try to build as I go along. Because when you look at science, you're looking at basically objective evidence to prove that which is proposed. Simply speaking, the question that I'm going to ask myself, if I combine sugar and milk together outside of the human body versus inside of the human body, do I have evidence of having alcohol? Now, sugar in and of itself, even without the presence of milk, can ferment to form alcohol. And there's some persons who have a very rare disorder or disease where their body naturally makes alcohol from the sugar that is taken. So when sugar is broken down, I'm going to keep it simple. When sugar is broken down, ultimately it can form alcohol, but different to the ethanol, which is in the alcohol that persons drink and get drunk with. Are you following me? So sugar is broken down and ultimately can ferment and form alcohol, but different to the ethanol, which is in the alcohol that we drink, so to speak. You have persons who naturally, if sugar stays a long time within their system, if they're not, passing stool as quickly as some other persons do, then naturally they will make alcohol from the sugar that they take in. I've been looking for objective evidence of the milk and sugar combination. I've not been finding that to date, to be honest. I've come across it even within Spirit of Prophecy. But what I'm more so seeing is that sugar in and of itself can ferment and lead to alcohol formation, but slightly different from that which will cause you to get drunk. So that's a simple answer to the question that you've asked. I'm not seeing it objectively, but I am seeing that sugar itself can form the alcohol. Additionally, sugar combined with yeast. Now, this is probably something that is more alarming, right? So sugar that is combined with yeast does form alcohol. And I'll leave that there. Pastor Greene, that's going to be a whole other explosion that we're going to have to look at, because sugar and yeast is really the combination that we need to watch, and not necessarily sugar and milk based on that which has been proven thus far. And remember, I'm speaking as a Christian, yes, but I'm also speaking based on that which is evidence-based.
Well, I appreciate that. It looks like our time has just about expired. I know time goes by very quickly. I really appreciate the insights that you have shared today. I am aware that some persons listening may be saying, Pastor Greene, why in the world did you talk about this today? You're going to interfere with my appetite. I suppose maybe that's the point. But
may I say something? Remember, we're not gonna suddenly withdraw. We're gonna do a gradual adjustment to our lifestyle, and we're gonna make it holistic by adding physical activity. One last thing quickly, Dr. Greene, because I know the time is up. Parents, we often use sugar as a reward for good behavior, and I want to end on this note, because if you behave yourself, you're gonna get your candy. If you behave yourself, you're gonna get the cake and ice cream. Please, let's stop that. That is a very negative reward system that is going to lead our children into trouble. So do not use sugar as a reward system for good behavior. We can have a part 2, Dr. Greene. Whenever you're ready, just let me know.
Most definitely. And I think I already told you that we need to talk about the adolescent element. And I'm thinking about a part 3 as well with you and the OBGYN, so that we can deal with some issues relating to the whole concept of sexuality and how that goes. It was a pleasure having you. We want to wish you God's blessings. Thank you so much. And I wish you all the best with your children. I know that when our children start going to school and that there are those other influences, it can be quite a challenge. But may God be with you. Thank you for the contribution that you have been making to the nation and the wider community. May God bless you. Thanks for having you on Let's Talk. Friends, next week, before we go, let me just say this last thing. Next week, we are going to be Next week is a new year. And Dr. Knowles is going to be back. We started a discussion last week. We didn't get very far. We had some technical issues, but it's a very important discussion. We're going to be talking about this whole concept of the developmental doctrinal issues, what makes Adventism Adventist. And it is a discussion that all of you need to be in on. May God bless you until next.